I'm Lyle Hanna. We'll wait just a few minutes to get started, but I don't know, depending on where you are in the Commonwealth, you're either already have a storm or your storm is coming. And mine came just as we said, it's 11 o'clock, let's let some people in. And then the wind started howling. So this is certainly appropriate. Bring on the storm. That's what we've been facing for 22 weeks here. And I think we're doing a darn good job, and I mean all of us on this call around the Commonwealth and around the nation that sign on to listen. We're doing a pretty good job with our employees. We need to do a better job as a community to better fight off this crazy epidemic. But let's get a couple more minutes and then we'll get started, and certainly welcome everyone.
And Lyle, I wanted to say good morning to everybody too. This has been it's been fun and interesting to deal with week in and week out, and I hope everybody learns as much about things as I have in trying to answer all the different things. It certainly keeps me on my toes because of all the different changes every single week and every single minute of every single day. And trust me, it changes that often.
All
and
right.
I've already had 4 questions this morning. A couple of them forwarded by email and a couple of them privately on this, and they're all about one issue. So when we get to that, hopefully I can answer it, and then hopefully after that, additional questions will flow in, and I'll still say I have no clue.
All right, let's get going. Everybody, welcome. This is our 19th session. We took a little delay in there. We've been doing this for 22 weeks, but you count that back, and we got started at the very beginning. And it's been a challenge. We were saying before this call started today with just our team on here, what a challenge it's been, but what a joy it's been too, to talk to so many of you, particularly during the course of the week. We really appreciate your input. We hope you'll keep firing questions to us today, because that's what inspires us and keeps us challenged and going. I'm Lyle Hanna, and we have on the call Jim Morris, who just spoke up a minute ago. Jim is our attorney that has kept us up on all of these things. And my goodness, we have to look at this stuff. A lot of times we're doing our slides on Monday morning, because when we did them on Friday, that was ridiculous. We had to do them all over on Sunday. Now we do them on Sunday, but we end up doctoring them on Monday. So it's good to have everybody. Allison is back with us today, Allison Petrie. And actually, Allison, Autumn Morris, and Chase Adams are all going to add some things from their experience, because we run HR for a bunch of companies. And so we're running into this stuff every day like you all are. So keep the cards and letters coming. Jim, I think you're going to start off today. One word before we get too far. These darn numbers in Kentucky, we're doing better this week than last week, but we've got to get everybody focused on us. And I actually travel around the state some, and I noticed, some places are more serious about it than others. I've also spent time in Maine. I did one of these calls from Maine one time. Maine, totally serious about this. Very low numbers. Everybody wears masks. This argument about masks, it doesn't hold water. I know you don't want to do it, don't like to do it. Not everybody does, but we need to do it. And the doctor says that, the doctor we had on here, and in other countries, that's the way they've beaten it off. So we need to be serious about the mask. Jim, you take it off. You're going to start off, and then we'll shift around a little bit during this call. No special guest outside our team this week, because we think we had enough to cover. Go ahead, Jim.
All right, so I'm going to get jumping right into this. So all the questions I've gotten so far is, what the heck do we do with the situation with the president's executive orders, and what does it actually mean? So a little background, congressional update. I know we had a congressional guest last week. They did go on their summer vacation. The House did, the Senate did not. Ongoing negotiations were going on throughout the end of July, beginning of August. They ran through the first week of August between the Democratic leaders of the House and Senate and the White House administration. There were some efforts to strip out some of the unrelated relief that was rejected. For those that don't know, there was relief in the $3.4 trillion that said that all illegal immigrants must be released from incarceration. It required mail-in voting nationwide. It gave bankruptcy relief to all the big, large cities such as Chicago that were already facing bankruptcy before COVID. It required wide-scale marijuana funding and some other things that some of the people just couldn't agree with. Requests to have that stripped out were denied. Now, some of this is tea leaf reading. No, I'm not going to anyone's talking points. Yes, I am trying to research inside information. But some of these things just would not be agreed to. So the next step was, what can we do to do a small package, a relief fund, somewhat like, if you recall me talking about phase 3.5, which was the PPP extension going to 24 weeks instead of 8. There was a huge push this week. There were several bills presented to Speaker Pelosi for her to consider separate payments, one for extending the unemployment for the next 2 weeks, next month, next week, various different ones. Her statement was that the House would not take up anything unless the Senate agreed to take up the entire $3.4 trillion, or whatever the House would agree to, or whatever leadership would agree to. One of the statements from her was that she offered $2 trillion and that was a non-starter. That came from her side. I don't know what else was in it, what was not in it, but it broke down. She would not allow anything to be presented on the House side that was individual or PPP extension. There were several of those that were pushed up the line to try to get things resolved. So then the next step was for everyone to meet together, and they did so every single day last week. As I think I said last Monday, they were actually meeting during our presentation starting at 11 o'clock. There was quite a bit of effort to get that resolved last Monday, and it actually sounded like they were going to get down to brass tacks and finish it. It didn't happen. So in response, on the 6th of August, the House did in fact recess until September 8th. Now that can be undone by the House, but that is the official word. The Senate, in response, refused to recess. So the Senate right now is still, and this is as of this morning, still in session and is not going to take a recess until the COVID relief bills are addressed. So they are still in session. Negotiations fell apart on Friday completely. Actually, Thursday night was the last actual effort. Basically, the statement from Ms. Pelosi, Speaker Pelosi, was, I told them bring more money or we won't talk. So that was the last statement she said she gave them, and that's where we are. So on the 8th, President Trump issued 4 executive orders. Those executive orders are as follows. So his statement was, due to the inability of Congress to reach a resolution, he took executive action. Legality of these will be addressed if they dare to. And that's, I hesitate for a second there, because there's going to be a political backlash for anyone that decides to actually challenge these particular bills, because these bills, or these, not bills, sorry, these executive orders are beneficial to the Democrat base. The Democrats will be the ones to challenge it, whether it's Congress. Now, there are a couple of suggestions that there could be people who are going to challenge the Medicare Social Security, because they are recipients of that. So you could have a class action challenging the viability of our Social Security. So stay tuned for that. But the immediate impact affects individuals, families, and businesses, and that's why we're here today. For those that don't know, and I'm not going to give the 3 tiers of government and who does what, a full-blown explanation, but in a nutshell, legislature creates the law. The president enforces the law or executes the law. That's why it's the executive branch, and the judicial branch, Supreme Court down, interprets the law. So they determine what is and is not constitutional. They interpret the actual laws, and then the president gets to enforce those. There are some exceptions, and that's where these 4 executive orders come into play. Those exceptions are that the president has the ability to act during an emergency. As everybody knows by now, COVID has in fact been declared an emergency. It is an emergency, and it is something that allows certain leeway. What the Congress still has to do is still controls the purse strings. If you will recall, I think we talked about this at the beginning, there was an order that I talked about briefly about the immigration wall that was entered because it has some impact on the rest of COVID. The Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, I believe, ruled that the wall building was illegal because money was taken out of a defense budget. Supreme Court reversed that and said the president has the authority under previous acts of Congress to use emergency funds that are put into the budget into different pools. That's what the president has done here. So the first of these, federal unemployment continuation, is a $400, not a $600. Here's the problem for Kentucky. It will be based upon the state agreeing to pay $100 of the $400. It's somewhat like work share. You know how that worked out. Our state unemployment office is a disaster, so I don't know how that's going to work. But the rule right now is $400 weekly federal unemployment aid on top of the state. Kentucky's maxed at $552. Kentucky would throw in another $100 to make it $652, and the federal would step in with $300 to make it $952. The intent was to come up with a certain amount of money, but not to pay people more than what they would receive at home on unemployment. So they're trying to change that a little bit. The issue with this is it diverted money from FEMA's disaster relief fund because he has declared a national disaster. All of the state governors have also declared disasters with regard to COVID-19. So this allows him to remove $44 billion from the DRF. And then to the extent the DRF gets to $25 billion, which is not part of the $44 billion, the 44 is on top, but when that fund is depleted to the point of $25 billion remaining in the disaster relief fund, or December the 6th, that is when this will run out. So that's where you see the bullet. The aid is in addition to the state. Kentucky is again capped at $552. The second of these, and this is where I've received all of the questions and I have none of the answers. Yes, I'm being somewhat sarcastic. No, not completely. What the president did was defer SSI and Medicare tax, otherwise known as payroll tax, 7.25% roundly, from September 1st, possibly August 1st. He said that he thought he could get it done retroactive to last week, through December 31st, 2020. That is for all employees earning less than $100,000. And then I've seen some numbers come out last night that it's approximately $1,200 additional per employee. He also addressed potential forgiveness. This is where he doesn't have single-handed authority, but he believes that he can work with Congress after the November election. Again, that's assuming which way he believes the election will go, that he will be able to make this a permanent waiver and not a holiday. Why is it a holiday? Why is it deferred? And what does it mean? Those are the questions I've gotten. It is a holiday because the administration, executive branch, collects taxes. That is the executive. They execute on orders. So the president is responsible for collecting. His administration runs the taxes, runs the enforcement of those, and then assures that monies are brought in so that legislative can spend the money. They're the only ones that can direct spending. So the president cannot impact and enforce a waiver, meaning you don't have to pay it back. What the president can do is say, we will not collect money now. That's the holiday. This means that it's deferred, not waived, until a later date, not forever. I saw some this morning saying, some guidance saying that employers should just ignore the executive order and keep taking the money out. The problem with that is that your employees know what you're doing. The result of this, and this is a little political statement, I believe that the president's actions were basically designed to force Congress to do something that it should have already done. So Congress is refusing to negotiate at all. The Senate wanted to present certain bills and the House said no. The House says all or nothing, we're not going to adopt something for unemployment. I think this ultimately is going to look bad on the Congress for refusing to do unemployment, refusing to extend PPP, refusing to do something other than a comprehensive. But the president's stuck with only deferring expenses or using emergency funds. So he found funding for the $400 that can be challenged. I don't think it will be, because I think that the people that would challenge it would be the Democrats in the House could file something on behalf of Congress challenging the president's authority, and then they're going to be reported in the press as challenging $400 a week. And what did they present instead? There was a bill on the floor to present $600 from the Republican side, and they refused to do it. I think that will backlash. So I don't think the $400 is going to be successfully challenged by Congress. I could see other agencies and other organizations, but I think Congress is going to be embarrassed to the point of not doing it. Payroll tax holiday, this falls within the purview of the president. I don't know that this one will be challenged. It could be questioned if it becomes a campaign slogan. There's already been a question as to what he can and can't do from the White House, but that's been challenged for over 20 years and largely rejected because he has to use the house in which he's staying to do certain things. So the deferred means your employees still have to receive, deferred means the employees will still have to pay their share. The employer doesn't have to pay it because it's been deferred to the end of the year, and then you're supposed to pay it. So there's basically what he did was extend it to the employees, not anything for the employers. Comment this morning, you should just ignore it and continue doing what you're doing. This is not my comment. I'm sorry. Let me rephrase. One of the statements that I've seen was employers should just ignore it and continue to collect it because the employees won't be saving 8% of their pay for a later date, and yet they're going to get hit with the taxes next year. I respectfully disagree with that for two reasons. Number one, your employees know about this and they think that they're going to get a holiday from tax. So you're going to upset a lot of people unless you know how to explain it. Number two, I would bank on about a 98% chance that Congress goes ahead and adopts some kind of waiver here to make up for this, because no one wants to say to an employee, okay, so you got this money, but now we want you to pay it back in 2021. People hate Congress already for a lot of different reasons, and I think that they would be really foolish to not adopt this. This was what I was pointing out last week. This was designed to try to not just be a free $1,200. It was designed to be in addition to the stimulus, that this would allow for additional monies to all of the employees, and it was something that President pushed for, that the House refused to include in the $3.4 trillion. because this would help both employers and employee side to have this be waived, not just a holiday. So one of the questions asked is, do we have to start doing this now? The answer is no. You do not have to start doing this now. Because it's a holiday, this is between you and your employees. Also, the executive order has not spelled out precisely how this will be done. This will come through the U.S. Treasury, the IRS guidance, and additional guidance from the Department of Labor, probably additional guidance from the White House. This was entered on Saturday, so I don't have any guidance yet on when does this become mandatory. Does this become mandatory, and how do we do this? What I did see in this morning's was don't do it because it's going to be a lot more paperwork for you. I would ignore that guidance of don't do it because it's paperwork, because if your employees believe they're going to get this money and they're hurting as an employee relations thing, you should explain to them this could come back at the end of the year, but this right now is an additional benefit to you from the government. Be careful spending it. You may want to put it aside. We'd be willing to put it aside for you. We can continue to withhold it if you want us to. And if Congress says this isn't a holiday, but we're going to make it good forever, we'll cut you a check at that time to make up the difference. But talk to your employees and explain it to them, because everyone right now is very confused by this, and you don't want to be a part of creating problems for your employees. So be open with them, be honest, and let them know that guidance right now doesn't exist yet. So that's on that one. The next one, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but I wanted to put it in there, the next two. One is there was a 120-day temporary eviction moratorium on federal funding in the CARES Act, but that expired in July. What this did was extend that through the end of the year, but it doesn't have the authority to stop it. It basically is recommending to the executive branch, which does have the weight of, does not have the weight of law, but does have the weight, just like we talked about last week with the NLRB letters that are written to the regions. This is the same kind of thing. When the president says we will not enforce any federal mortgages or federal Title VIII, basically rent through the end of the year because people can't afford it, that means that there's no foreclosures, there's no kicking people out for any federal. So basically what he did is, without the authority of Congress, without the directive from Congress, he's basically doing a private letter notification to all the regional offices, don't enforce it. Since he controls the purse strings on enforcement, that means no one's going to be enforced on homeowner or renter. If you have a mortgage, don't try to not pay your mortgage, because that's not what this means. This basically means if you had a federal mortgage, federally protected mortgage, that during COVID you're not going to be, but this doesn't protect your credit score, and it doesn't impact the long-term fact that you're going to be removed from your house for not paying it, so don't be silly. The last one is the extension of student loan relief. The CARES Act had a provision that made interest at zero, I think through the end of July. What this did was, because he again is responsible for collecting, he passed an executive order that said we're extending interest rate through the end of 2020, and we're not requiring payments through the end of 2020. So in a nutshell, those are the four things that the president did. It went to the extent of his authority without getting into purse strings, with the exception of the unemployment. I think it's going to be challenged. I think there would be some successful challenges to using FEMA's disaster relief, but then again, he does have authority to declare a disaster and to divert monies out of that relief fund by congressional authority. And this has been declared a disaster nationwide by each of the governors, by each of the localities, and he's taking money out of that relief fund and using it for what he deems is a disaster. Now, Can that be challenged? Sure. Will it? Probably. But by the time they challenge it, that money's already spent. And if a governor doesn't do it, looking at our governor by hypothetical, then it's going to look like a governor didn't do their job. Because for $100 per week, they could provide $300 additional per week. And what's your justification for not spending that money? What's your justification for not giving relief? So that's the update from the 4 executive. I do have more on the back end. We're going to jump around a little bit here, but that's and some of these we've got legal questions in general about PPP and about medical 14-day. Some of those we're going to have addressed by the Hannah Resource Group people, and then some of those on the legal side I'll be bouncing back at the end. So I can answer some questions, or we can go ahead and move into theirs and answer the questions at the end. You all tell me what you want to do.
Let's take questions on this right now, because I think while it's on people's minds, it's sort of better to address it. Is that okay with you, Allison and Autumn?
Yeah, that's fine. If anybody has any, if they just want to put them in the chat. All of the questions we've gotten so far that Jim hasn't already answered are about medical documentation for FFCRA or exposure.
Okay.
Yeah, and I see that. So if they're all about FFCRA and exposure, we could probably just wait a little bit, and I'll get to those on the other side. And if anybody wants to throw questions down there, I can answer some of those while Autumn, Allison, and Chase are doing their part, and I can answer the rest when I get to the rest of my legal update.
All right.
So we'll do it that way.
Nothing's popping up there. We'll press on. A lot of you know that we run HR for a whole bunch of companies, and so we're faced with a lot of the challenges that you're faced with every day. And I asked Allison and Autumn and Chase just to give us a highlight, something that they've faced that they think might be helpful, something that may have surprised them and they found a way around it. And so I think Autumn's going first, aren't you, Autumn? Just
yes,
to share with us some information that she's found that was pretty helpful. Take it away.
Yeah, so I think as HR professionals or business owners, we're so caught up in the legal and the changes in the laws and trying to make sure that we're following all those. I think sometimes it's hard to see the employee perspective and how they're feeling. So I found this interesting study. It was published by Sherman, conducted by a company called JDP. And I thought it was really helpful, and I'm using it with my clients now to kind of understand the employee perspective and make sure employees are comfortable in the workplace. So the first thing, and I think the most important thing that I saw in this study was, do you trust that your coworkers will respect your boundaries around COVID-19? A majority said yes, 69%, so that's great, but 31% said no. That's around a third of your workforce that aren't comfortable with other employees respecting their boundaries. And I think that's really challenging. And next, do you think people who return earlier will be favored by management? That's something I've been thinking about a lot. It seems to be true in general, and I'm wondering what the reason for that is. Are employees truly doing better work in the office, or do we just feel like they're doing better or more dedicated because they're coming back earlier? It's really interesting to think about, and it's really interesting to balancing these two perspectives, right? Like, how do you make sure employees are comfortable, but you're not making it impossible for them to work? And so if we go on to the next slide. So this slide just shows different policies or different items and the employee perspective on them. So 55% of people think it's necessary that no handshakes would be allowed in the workplace. I know a lot of companies have put policies in for that, but also a good chunk of employees are neutral, and some think it's overkill. So how are we handling employees that think it's overkill with employees that think it's necessary not to? What if the employees that say it's overkill reach out to shake the hand of an employee that thinks it's necessary? Are those employees comfortable saying something to the other side? or do they feel it's even more challenging? What if this is a manager and an employee and they have to tell their boss that they're not comfortable shaking hands? It can put employees in a really uncomfortable position. So I'm working on making sure employees, especially managers, are trained on allowing employees to speak how they feel and not mean anything else by it, just to take it as it is. I've seen some companies that have actually done wristbands. I'm not sure that that's practical for everyone, but some bigger companies have done wristbands that show I'm not comfortable with anyone coming close to me. I'm just in the office to do my work. If you need me, talk to me through the computer. And a different wristband will say, I'm okay talking if you have a mask on. I've also seen that done with signs on doors as well. I think it's really important. On the other side here, you see sensors that track movements. I think that's really interesting because that's the complete opposite side, right? Like most people think that that's overkill. So just balancing those two perspectives and making sure that employees are comfortable and willing to speak up and that they don't feel judged or managers won't retaliate against them in any way just because they feel a certain way. That's about all I have.
I think I'm gonna.
And are we on to?
Yeah.
Oh.
I think it's me next, right? So I was just gonna.
Yeah, Chase.
Yeah, taking some time here to I guess bring up the note about contact tracing and kind of a lesson learned / hot tip. So obviously, if you've done your due diligence and you've prepared yourself and your workforce as part of the Healthy at Work guidelines, you probably have detailed contact tracing, processes and procedures in place. And if you haven't, the CDC has an excellent section on the employer's responsibilities and some kind of guidelines to follow, especially if you need to work with a local health department, if you do have positive cases and they would like to partner with folks. So if you haven't brushed up on that, you might want to go head over to the CDC website. But just a hot tip and a lesson learned, and one that was a little bit of a struggle to try to figure out was, I guess, we have all the contact information, hopefully, for our employees and their cell phone numbers and ways to reach them. But also take a minute to think about all of the contractors or vendors that you potentially might have coming on site at any given time. A lot of people have taken this opportunity with less people in the building to do those kind of projects around the place, like sprucing up the paint job, or they're reconfiguring offices to be more socially distanced. But make sure that you have all the contact information and phone numbers for those people as well ahead of time. Lesson learned, I had a situation where we did have a contractor in the building, of course, during a time where there was a suspected case, and it took a lot of maybe hoop jumping or a hurdle to get a hold of that person because nobody knew who they were or what their personal contact information was. We figured it out, but it was a challenge nonetheless, trying to get that person all taken care of and let them know that about their potential risk or exposure in the building that day. But that's my most recent contact tracing lesson that I've learned.
All right, so make sure you've got feedback or contacts for everybody in the building that comes in and out of your building. Good input. Allison, how about you?
All right, so I know we've had a lot of questions about travel and travel policies. So I wanted to kind of just walk you all through the creation of a policy, kind of some of the things we talk our clients through when they're trying to decide what they want their policy to contain, and then also talk through a little bit of a sample of one. But so number one, of course, if you want employees to report that they're traveling, who are they supposed to report it to? Do you want it to be human resources, their supervisor, the Healthy at Work officer? The recommendation is always to have one consistent person who can help own the decision making, so it helps with consistency. At most of my client sites, it should be directed to human resources. And then do you want them to report to you anytime they travel out of state at all? Only if they travel to a hot spot? You kind of need to set the geographic parameters so that people know what they need to be thinking really carefully about. So until recently, I think a lot of people were doing any out of state. Lately, it's moved a lot to just focused on hotspots. But how do you define a hotspot? That's another question you're going to get from employees, or the person that is enforcing this needs to be aware of what you define as a hotspot. So the governor's office has been releasing that information. I believe it's from Johns Hopkins data. CDC also has information on this. They have an interactive interactive map that you can look at. You can also find other reputable sources, but what you want to do is pick one source and make sure that all of your employees are aware of it so they can look at wherever they're planning to travel, kind of what, whether it is considered a hotspot or if it's trending in that direction, so they can make an informed decision. And then that way the person who's enforcing this policy can enforce it consistently. So we have an example of a link to a CDC website on the next slide that you're welcome to check out. Oh, sorry, I still got a little bit more to talk about on the last slide. So employees and paid leave. So clearly you also need to define whether or not if they take time off, it will be paid or unpaid. So if they are forced to quarantine, are you making them use PTO? Are you allowing them to use PTO? Or are you allowing them to work remote if they have that capability? Are you requiring any quarantine for travel be unpaid? Or are you doing another special type of leave? So I know we've talked a little bit about FFCRA. It gets a little bit tricky. Whereas if you are requiring them to quarantine, I think we've kind of determined that there's not necessarily an FFCRA reason for them to get that leave. But if they experience symptoms or get a test, then the argument could be made that they could qualify for FFCRA. So you kind of want to set those parameters. Maybe you have to use PTO if you have it. You then have to use unpaid leave once you've exhausted PTO. And then if you test or have symptoms, you can submit to see if you're eligible for FFCRA. And then the length of quarantine. So 14 days has been kind of the standard. There's been some talk recently from different sources about whether 10 days might be acceptable. So again, just whatever you decide, make sure that you cite your source and that you're consistent. And then you do need to consider a little bit infection versus exposure. You may travel somewhere and be exposed to people that may or may not have COVID, but you may not be infected for several days. Even if you are exposed and you do contract it, it may take a couple days for your infection to show up on testing. So just think through that timeline. And then a lot of people are starting to think about putting a release with a negative test after so many days in their policy. So we'll look at that on the next slide. I think I am ready now. Thank you. So here's a sample of a policy that one of our clients has adapted. So employees are required to report travel outside of the state to HR or supervisor in advance of them leaving. A hotspot is defined as an area where cases within the last 7 days fall into the top category based on the CDC tracker, and there's a link if you'd like to check it out. If people are not reporting timely, the policy says that basically whatever date we are informed, we will look at whether or not it's a hotspot on that date and when the travel took place and try to kind of make our best decision from there. Employees are encouraged to work remotely while they're quarantined, but if they can't, they must use PTO. If they don't have PTO, the time will be unpaid. And then employees who travel to a hotspot will be required to self-quarantine for the full 14 days upon return to Kentucky in an abundance of caution. They do allow this particular employer we decided to allow employees who have traveled to a hotspot but have no reason to believe they have had direct exposure to COVID-19 and are not experiencing related symptoms may choose to quarantine for 5 days and then take a COVID-19 test. Assuming the test is negative and they are released by their healthcare provider, the employee may then return to their work site. So that's where the exposure versus infection comes in here. They would still have to quarantine for 5 days in case they were exposed, but if they are not infected and not showing signs at that time, we could make the decision to allow them to return. And then a reminder that employees who experience symptoms of COVID at any time, regardless of travel, should not report to work. So some of the questions and issues that we've encountered, because no policy is perfect, and you are going to have, especially with things changing so quickly, you are going to have issues that you're going to encounter along the way. So we've had some questions on what length of time constitutes travel out of state for this purpose. We did not define that in the hopes that employees would report any out of state travel, and we could kind of decide on a case-by-case basis. If you run across the border really quick to have lunch with your grandma, is that a 14-day quarantine when instead of going, somewhere across state lines for 14 days? I think we can all reasonably agree, no, that's not the same situation, but encouraging reporting anytime there's any question is going to give you a little bit more insight into what your employees are doing and allow you to make the decisions that are going to keep them the safest. So how do you discipline those who don't report if you discover there was travel? We've been doing different levels depending on whether they went to, again, if they didn't know about the policy or if they purposefully didn't report, which of course is hard to determine, but we're trying. And the discipline's a little bit different, but we do recommend at the very least a write-up for their file, and making it clear to people that this is something that will be enforced. And then different levels of exposure. So again, you're going to have an entirely different level of exposure if you go to a private beach house versus if you go to Disney World or a place with a lot of people, whether you drive or you fly there. These are all kind of things that you have to take into consideration on a case-by-case basis. But if they're going to a hot spot, regardless, if your policy says it, they should be quarantined. And I think I saw a question come in here. So they need to see their healthcare provider in order to be released. So if they're not experiencing any symptoms and they've quarantined for the full 14 days, we have not been requiring them to see a healthcare provider. If they are experiencing symptoms during that time, we do ask that they get tested and then do whatever the healthcare provider recommends. But if we are requiring them to quarantine out of an overabundance of caution and they have not experienced symptoms, we have not been requiring them to be released from a healthcare provider. And what if they test after 5 days and are negative? So if they get a test and the healthcare provider doesn't have any other concerns and they release them, we have been allowing them to return. Jim may have some insight into this. He may have some recommendations one way or the other, but that's the way that we've kind of built the policy. We're adapting it as things change. They are changing really quickly, but at least the goals are always to be consistent, to be able to justify why you're making the policy in general and adapt it as it changes. So we try to document whatever sources we're using to kind of show, look, this is our best faith effort to keep people safe. Here's what's recommended. Here's what's required. Here's what we're doing. Focus is always safety.
All right. Thank you, Autumn and Chase and Allison. Let's see, any of those questions that come in apply here?
I think we're having employees who are having to take their children back to college, which is out of state. So based on this employer's policy, they would be required to, I guess the question is for how long. If it's a day trip and they're dropping off their employee and coming back, I think that, and if they are not seeing a lot of people, I think that could be something the employer decides on a case-by-case basis. But if they're taking them to a hot spot, they're staying overnight, they're going out to eat, they're seeing their college-age students, classmates, per this policy, they would be required to quarantine, and they could potentially do the 5 days and then take a test, and if they're negative, return.
I think the important thing here is communication, because you can see that every situation can be a little different. And if people will talk to you about it before they leave town, then they may alter their behavior accordingly. That would be very helpful. So, what you're saying is you're just driving across the border, dropping some people off and coming back. That's not a big deal. But if you're staying, you're doing outside activities that cause them to be engaged with other people and so forth, particularly if they're in a hot spot, then it's a lot more serious. So communicating with employees is really important here. It's like the policies are not as fixed as the ones we currently have in place. And it's not fair to hit them with a moving target. So more communication is going to lead to better results. Any other questions there?
Oh, we did say, so someone asked, this is mandated for Kentucky to quarantine when traveling out of state. No, the governor, I think we determined in the last webinar that the governor was recommending it. So this is only if you are an employer that wants to create a travel policy to help protect your employees and your workforce a little bit more. So it's my understanding there's no requirement to have a travel policy at this time. That might change tomorrow.
All right. Let's get back to Jim. If more questions come in, we'll certainly take them later. Jim's got some PPP and some more legal updates to take care of. Jim, take it away.
All right. So as some of you have learned on these things, I'm literally making changes to slides as we go based upon questions and some of the information. So the first part of this has nothing to do with PPP, legal tidbits, and Kentucky update. I wanted to put this up here because the questions that are being asked, and Allison's doing the best job she can for employers, and this is where sometimes the legal and the HR, it gets so murky and so confusing, it's hard to follow what to do. And no, I'm not saying what she just said is wrong at all, because it's not. What I wanted to do was to point out the confusion that she and I and HR and legal and government and everyone is having. And it's part of the reason why I've asked the governor's office to address things more clearly than they have. So I wanted to point out the issue. A lot of your questions on this FFCRA, return to work, hotspot, quarantine recommended, don't travel, all the different things are, when can we allow people back? How do we allow people back? What steps do we have to take? Well, the government should be a little bit better about giving some guidelines when they're faced with a statutory mandate. We have a statutory mandate under the FFCRA. So I grabbed this out of a slide I gave in I just moved that by mistake. I grabbed this out of a slide I gave phase 15, so a month ago, when we were talking about back to school and the potential issues about what would happen to you all trying to deal with school. So if you see too many things in here about school, just keep in mind I literally had about 30 seconds to steal it, change the number at the top, dump it in here, and try to start talking about FFCRA again. But I think it's critical to point this out. So the first one of these is, whoops, just going to try to get my highlighter to work. Subject to a quarantine or isolation order, and we talked a little bit about this last week and the week before, that this is not a governor's order, so it doesn't necessarily fall under number one. I would suggest to you, though, part of the disaster created by a governor order saying don't travel and we recommend self-isolation is this one. The governor has, in fact, advised to self-quarantine if you go to a location that is a hotspot. So last week we had this, and I've been thinking about it all week long, and I think that Allison's guidance is really good on that, so I'm not challenging it, other than the frustration from a legal side and from an HR of what the heck do we tell people in real life? How do we handle this in a real life scenario where last week I joked about it, but I'm dealing with it. Somebody wants to go on vacation to Florida to go to Disney World or the beach, or they're bored, they're taking their kids while their kids are out of school. I don't care. Whatever it is, they're subject to a recommended self-quarantine. They've been advised by the governor to self-quarantine. So now you have FFCRA 1 says if you're subject to a recommendation to self-quarantine, and you have a governor that says, I recommend you self-quarantine, technically speaking, that employer falls under the FFCRA, because if I'm a good attorney for an employee, I could figure out a way to sue an employer to say, you know what, you have a policy or you have an order that says I'm supposed to self-quarantine. It doesn't say I can't go. I went. Now I come back. Now you have to pay me not to work. So if I am a judge looking at this, I have to look at it and go, okay, you knew you were going to hotspot. You went anyway. You didn't go for business. Your employer didn't make you go. And yet you come back and you want to be paid an extra 2 weeks for taking a 2-week vacation? That you shouldn't be able to do that. But I could see issues for employers, and this is where, if you go back, we had an alphabet that I ran through 2 or 3 times where I've tweaked it from week to week, but we've talked about the different litigation that I see coming out of this, and this is one of them. Because when a governor says, hotspot, self-quarantine recommendation, so on, it's going to create a loophole for people to use. So be prepared for that and document it. What I would do is I would allow people the time off as long as they understand upon return they're going to self-quarantine without using any request for medical leave. So if you handle it ahead of time, using Allison's recommendation there, but you literally address it ahead of time with your employee who is going to a hotspot on their own. This is not if you're sending them, but they're going on their own, and you have a documentation from them that they understand that this will be without leave, or they're going to use their own time when they get back, then maybe you have it resolved. Maybe not, because I could also see an attorney saying, wait a minute, you weren't allowed to force them to use PTO instead of sick leave. Remember that? We talked about that in week 3 and week 7 or 8, where an employer cannot force an employee to select between which type of leave they're going to use. Again, these are the things that are going to happen when you have a local, a state, a federal, and sometimes the state's not keeping up with the federal. So that's the only thing I wanted to point out here is, and I've got one other on this. This one here, you are advised to self-quarantine. That means it doesn't say medical advice to self-quarantine. So I've got a governor who has issued an order that says we advise anyone that goes here to self-quarantine. You could have a slick attorney or an employee who believes that they can skirt the rules come back and say, now I want you to pay me stay at home. So that's a problem. The other problem on here, and I saw one of the questions come through, what if they're negative but they still get a 14-day recommendation from a doctor? That's been the problem I've seen with the FFCRA from the beginning, and I said it on week 2 or 3 the first time I saw this bullet point, and I've used this slide, different ones for different things, but I've used these 6 lists here, or 6 items, to be a huge red flag. So this one is, once they get a recommendation on a doctor's note, it falls under number 1. So the person, you send them for a test, they go, doctor says they're negative, you want them to come to work. The question that I saw in the chat session was, at what point can we fire them? You can't fire them if they have, and this is really frustrating, but you cannot fire someone if they have a doctor's note that says that the doctor recommends a 14-day self-quarantine, because now it's a doctor physician recommendation and you're falling squarely within FMLA, even if it wasn't the FFCRA or CARES Act extension of FMLA to include the FMLEA or extended FMLEA. Now you are literally just dealing with, you have a doctor that recommends the person stay at home, and now you're interfering with that, unless they're outside of the 12 weeks. And one other thing that I've recommended is, if you recall, I'm like, hey, FMLA, you can ask for doctor's notes, you can ask for guidance, you can ask for backdrop, explanation, information. But wait, that's why you come here in about, I'm going to skip slides here because I think this is more important now than the slides I have upcoming. So we're going to come back and do the PPP at the end. I want to talk about what I have on the slides because there is a big change to the FFCRA and enforcement of all of these things. It's not yet law, but I want to jump to some of these to address. Give me a second to find it because I'm going out of order. There we go. All right. I think I've explained to everybody before, the United States Supreme Court is the only true judicial authority over the land. They govern all of the different circuit courts that govern all of the different states that make the different courts. We're in the Sixth Circuit. The circuit is Michigan, Tennessee, New York area, Connecticut. So not yet to the circuit, but a district court in the Southern District of New York. And this is one of the problems that everyone is dealing with now. It used to be that district court judges only issued orders that they believed affected their particular district. Lately, a lot out of California, and this is a personal commentary because that's not what we were all taught in law school. The Ninth Circuit has always been known, as long as I've been practicing, as the Ninth Circus, because the Ninth Circuit comes up with some of the most absurd, ridiculous, crazy rulings that anybody's ever seen. They are reversed more than anyone else in the United States, reversed more than anyone. The Second Circuit falls really close behind that. They are reversed all the time, not as much as the Ninth, but the New York districts end up with a lot of crazy rulings. This one, I'm not saying whether it's crazy or not, but this does impact you, so that's why I wanted to jump to this slide. Southern District of New York just struck down substantial portions of the Department of Labor advice that I've given you in the past and that I was just talking about. First, it declared that starting April 1st, you remember in March 26th, roughly, don't ask me what week that was of our phases, but I made a comment to you that the Department of Labor came out with a frequently asked question and said, employers who are shutting down after April 1st did not have to pay FFCRA, and it was a huge issue before that because I was telling employers, if you have any belief you're going to shut down, close down before April 1st because you're going to get hit starting April 1st with FFCRA payments even if you don't have work. Well, the Department of Labor came out with guidance and said, no, look, if you're going to close down your operations, you don't have to comply with the FFCRA. The Southern District of New York just struck that down. What's the implication on this? We don't know because it literally happened on Monday of last week. The Department of Labor has two choices. It can take it up to the Second Circuit, which is the one that, like I said, has a lot of things that end up being reversed by the United States Supreme Court. They could adhere to it, or they could change all of their frequently asked questions to reflect the proper ruling as this proper for this court. We doubt that they're going to do a rewrite because the law is only effective through December 31st. By the time they rewrite it and go through all of that, the law will no longer be in effect. I believe they'll be challenging this at the Second Circuit. I believe the Ninth Circuit will also issue a similar, because they love to piggyback on anything to throw any monkey wrench in there. The Sixth Circuit or Fifth Circuit or one of the others that's a little bit more logical will agree, probably the 11th, which is in Florida, Georgia, Alabama, will adopt one to say that it is clearly legal. And this will end up in front of the Supreme Court on short shrift order because no one knows how to handle it. But just be aware, right now there is a district court that has declared it illegal to omit employees who worked for a company that shut down after April 1st. Second thing that this court did was declared the healthcare provider was too broadly defined and was rejecting the Department of Labor's definition. That was the definition of anyone in the healthcare industry that works for any healthcare provider at all is excluded from enforcement of FFCRA. That's one I've always had a problem with it being in there in the first place because I think we should allow our first responders to have leave if they need as well. I think it was a little unfair, but that's a private comment. The third thing is the reason why I wanted to have this here. This court, let me get to that. It rejected the requirement that an employer agree to intermittent leave under the FFCRA. The FFCRA, Department of Labor, frequently asked question, one of the 100 and something they had, said that the employer had to meet and confer and agree with the employee as to how to handle intermittent leave. This particular court said, nope, don't have to do that. Employees can literally just call you and say, yep, I'm going to be out tomorrow because my child doesn't have child care provider, or I'm going to be out, but I'm not going to run it by you first. Now, I've talked about it at length about the employee dealing with a student and trying to run the student through. I get that one, and that's going to have to be intermittent, and the employer can't hold the employee to it. But we've also talked about sick leave, and the whole idea of FFCRA is it's not supposed to be intermittent leave to be sick. It's not supposed to be intermittent leave because you don't feel well on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but you feel fine on Tuesday and Thursday. This one's going to create some issues. The next one creates the most issues, and it's the biggest concern I have with regard to what we're talking about today, which is we want a return to work. You do have the authority to, one, require a testing. I saw that in the questions. Yes, we talked about this. The CDC, the EEOC, based upon the CDC, said, yes, you can force people to get tested before they return to work. Remember, I did point out you cannot do antibody testing. That was a subsequent ruling from the CDC saying no antibody testing because that gets into the GINA, the Genetic Information Notification Act. You can't get into people's genetics. You cannot know things as an employer about their genetics. So the CDC backed off of its testing and said no genetic testing, but yes to an active virus testing. So you can require it. You can force that. If they don't do it, you can refuse to allow them to come back to work, and you can fire people for not adhering to a directive that protects the rest of your employees. However, this doctor or this judge said you cannot require any documentation in support of the FFCRA. What I had said to you was that the note, the Department of Labor said, yeah, you can get documentation, but be loose with it because doctors are really busy, so don't force a specific document. Don't require a specific letter. Be loose with it. Allow a note on a prescription pad. Allow some other things. And we talked about that in different weeks. This particular judge has said you can't require any documentation. I think it's absurd. I don't think it'll be upheld, but just keep that in mind that there is at least a judge out there and he thinks that he can do this nationwide. The directives I've heard right now is that this is only being enforced in the Southern District of New York, but yet the other employees can point to this and try to make hay with it. So just be careful. In a completely different one and a lot less important one, the Southern District of New York, again, the same exact district, issued a nationwide injunction on the enforcement of the public charge rule. The public charge rule is an immigration naturalization USICS policy. What it basically said is if you're receiving any money from the federal government, various agencies, you cannot get your immigration status changed. This just got issued. I look for it to change, but if you have employees that are receiving any kind of federal assistance and they're an immigrant that wants to extend green card status or they want to go for permanent status or any other changes, this Southern District of New York order says that it's nationwide and it's struck down temporarily during COVID any immigrants that use any kind of federal assistance. Again, a lot less impactful than the first one, but given our discussion about the FFCRA and the sick leave policy, that creates a problem. One of the questions I saw was, what happens if we started out as a company that had more than 50 and now we have less than 50 due to COVID? The answer is pretty simple. If you're less than 50, there are certain things in certain things in the FFCRA you don't have to do, but you need to get some guidance from HR/legal to address which of those things you don't have to do, when that applies, how it applies, because if they're on furlough versus termination, and I know that we said statewide for unemployment that doesn't make a difference, but to the federal government under the FFCRA it may. So you need to be careful if you're really close to the 50 number, because you don't want to get sued by one of those employees that says, you were under 50 when I got laid off, so that applies still because you were at 50 or above. How that plays out, that's a really strategic, legal complex, so I can't get into that too much. All right, so let me go backwards. Actually, I'm going to go forwards, and we're going to do the last one last. Let me go to another legal tidbit. Couple of things. These are not huge, but they are important for some of you. So on August 3rd, the EEOC announced resumption. Last week I said that they announced resumption of investigations. This week they announced resumption of investigation closure actions, i.e. right to sue, 90-day notifications, and those types of things that have been suspended due to not wanting to mail things. And last week we talked about them still mailing, but also allowing electronic, encouraging it, and so on. They've now triggered the right to sue. So if you have a large-scale business or even a mid-size, and some of the companies I work with, we end up with a lot of these are being held. All of a sudden, we're probably going to get right to sue notifications. It's going to trigger a lot of action on your HR part to address the responses to some of these, because if all of these employees have 90 days to file suit, means that you can't stagger step some of your answers and responses, motions to dismiss, removals to federal court, things like that. So be prepared, because you're going to have an onslaught of 90-day notices. If anybody's issued a request to the EEOC, this is all going to start triggering during the month of August. So that means that your 90-day period for your employees to sue you will be up in November, around the middle of November, and you're going to have all kinds of things moving. So just be prepared, budget for it, put it into your risk management, and have a plan in place, because they're all going to come due at about the same time. August 3rd to the 8th, I'm not going to list them all because the CDC has gotten insane with the amount of updates that they're throwing. Literally, I'm seeing 5 or 6 a day. A lot of them are just on deaths, on how they count deaths. I think you count them by who's deceased, but how they count tracing, what tracing is. They did come out with new guidance. I'm sorry, OSHA came out with new guidance on automotive service workers. These are not your factory workers, but these are the ones working on your vehicle, oil changes, tire rotations, things like that. If that's important to you, I just wanted to put it here, because there are a lot more of those types of industries around, whether you're a Lexus dealership or a car repair or car mechanic shop, things like that. So I threw that in there. August 7th, the CDC issued youth and adult sports guidance. No sharing of equipment, no physical closeness, hand hygiene, stay home if you're sick, everything there. You kind of got to look at it and go, wonder how much we're paying a group of 20 to 30 people at the CDC to come up with it, because I could have written it in about a minute and a half. But it's out there. I don't know how they are going to enforce the physical closeness. For those that care, inside information here, the 5 big conferences in the NCAA, I believe, are shutting down today. The Big Ten this morning. The rest are all announcing this afternoon. They had an emergency meeting yesterday, just so those, if you want to know that. So fall sports are apparently being shut down. Youth sports are this. I believe that our KHSAA will use this no physical closeness guidance from the CDC to shut down any fall football activities and other activities outside of track and field, but even those are going to be really difficult to have 6-foot separation, masks, and so on. So I put that in there because I think that's really going to impact any remaining sports that are out there, but that's what's on the screen from the CDC. They did also issue new guidance on cleaning, disinfecting of schools. Interesting thing there was they're literally teaching us about the difference between deep cleaning and disinfectant. I was blown away by how many words you can use to come up with the difference between the two. One means disinfecting, one means you're cleaning. Figure out the difference between the two. They also issued new COVID-19 forecasting because they were so far off on the last several that they're explaining how they came up with it and how to fix some of those. So that's the guidance from the CDC. I see a question in the frequently asked that I want to really quick address. We addressed before, and I want to throw it out there again because we are going to have a lot of school closings. There are 3 different school closings that impact. If the school mandates closing, you have to do the FFCRA leave for your employees. If the school mandates every other day closing, you're going to have to pay your employees under FFCRA every other day whenever the school is closed. If the school gives an option, this is where we talked about at the beginning of August, end of July. I had a big one at the end of July that was all about school reopening. If you have an option and your employee selects an option, the school may think they're doing a good thing, but what they've done is they've just killed both the employees' opportunities and the employers, because remember, under FFCRA, the employer gets reimbursed dollar for dollar from the federal government. You don't get reimbursed because the employee made an option. And to go back to the slide, and it's okay to go back because I was going to go on to the next one anyway after that. Whoops, can't get to move. If you go back to the FFCRA slide, you're only entitled to it for a child if the school is closed. So if the school is not closed and you're making an option to stay at home, you get no relief under the FFCRA. More importantly, as an employer, the employer doesn't get any relief because the school gave an option of staying open and you made the voluntary decision to homeschool. No mandatory forced closure. The school is in fact open, so you get no FFCRA leave. You should really enforce with your employee. It's not you being a jerk. The FFCRA says you get reimbursed if the school's closed. If the school's not closed, you can't afford to give away free money. That's how I explained it. Go back and look at it. We had a full 2-hour presentation all about the differences between the different options. I think I gave as an example Fayette County and Jefferson as the closed, Bowling Green and Covington as the hybrid, where they're saying they're giving an option. No, theirs was every other day. And the third one, I think, was Scott County had the option of staying open and allowing people to stay at home if they so chose. And that's the one where the employees are going to get burned, and the employer if they're not paying attention, because the school is not closed. There is no forced closure. It's an option of the employee and the child. All right, let me get back into this. Actually, before I do that, in case I run out of time, Kentucky's actions in response to the COVID-19. There are a couple of things I want to cover here. Let me make sure there's nothing else. Yep. All right. So the Kentucky Supreme Court issued a new order on Friday, the 7th of August. They scheduled oral argument for the Scott County case, but not, the Boone County case, but not the Scott County case, the one that I had told you that they had combined. They actually separated out oral argument. They're going to hear them separately. The oral argument is scheduled for September 17th. All executive orders will remain in effect until September 17th because they issued a new reminder, which they didn't need to do, in their order declaring that no circuit court orders can declare anything unconstitutional until such time as the Supreme Court weighs in. So September 17th will be a big day with the Supreme Court. I do believe some of these will be declared to be invalid, but it's interesting to me they're separating out the way that the agricultural was handled in Scott County versus the Boone County broad base. So I don't know how they're going to, I can't read the tea leaves yet, haven't seen anything else. I do know that the Attorney General has joined in to request that these be declared unconstitutional. But it was important for making sure that everything wasn't in turmoil from county to county, that the Supreme Court weigh in. I just wish they would have had argument a little bit sooner than 45 days after. Executive orders were entered. We talked a little bit about this, but not a whole lot, but they ordered that bars be closed and restaurants 25% of pre-pandemic capacity. That goes into effect until tomorrow. Oh, there went my slides. I thought I had my highlighter up there, but it's gone. Let me go back. Sorry. Just wanted you all to see the bouncing around. The problem is that this is void starting tomorrow or through tomorrow. So on Wednesday, we don't know what the direction is going to be. My understanding is that bars and restaurants, this was what I heard on Friday night, are going to be mandated closed at 10 o'clock p.m. every day, regardless of whether they serve food or not. Bars are not going to be allowed to open, still 25%, but now a 10 o'clock closure. That's my understanding. The other thing that was in there was a recommendation of no in-person school until at least the third week of August. We're pretty close to that now. I do anticipate a new executive order. All right, so something that really kind of surprised me, brand new guidance on PPP. For anybody, and this is huge because I've heard nothing. I'm the only one that I have seen any guidance at all weekend long, and I thought people would jump on this, but it was on August the 4th, last Tuesday, the Small Business Administration, U.S. Treasury issued a huge amount of new PPP forgiveness. I didn't write these as questions anymore. My questions are answers because it was kind of silly. All I had to do was literally, so take a look if you really need to see the actual FAQ, but literally what I did was I took the question and turned it into an answer because that's how their questions were written, and I was like, why are you guys wasting everybody's time? Just get to brass tacks and tell us what the answer is. So the question was sole proprietors, independent contractors, self-employed. You now use the EZ 3508 EZ or lender equivalent. So that question's been out there because these types of people did not fall within the regular application. They were late. The application today or yesterday, if I may be wrong, I think it was Saturday, was the last day to apply for your PPP. So if you didn't do it, you're out of luck. I've been telling you for 3 months to do it, so you weren't listening. I do expect a new Congress extension of PPP. I don't know that you'll have to submit anything else. I think it's going to be a calculation based upon your last loan. I see some heavies getting ready to happen to anyone who received more than $2 million on the PPP. They're getting ready to really open up and start going after some of those. And if you're a law firm listening to this and you know who you are because I've seen the whole list, there's one particular law firm, regional, man, are they going to be in trouble. I won't tell you which one, but you can look it up yourself. They advertise an awful lot and they have a Florida connection. You can figure that out. Wow, a lot of money. I'll just leave it there. PPP lenders can use scanned documents. They don't want people getting together, so use electronic signatures and scans. If a borrower submits a timely loan forgiveness application, you don't have to make any payments. That's pretty basic, but these are all critical to know. Loan forgiveness, payroll costs. The first one was general loan forgiveness. Those are all pretty common sense. Payroll. Some of this I've covered, but they came out with it again and they addressed them all a little bit clearer, so I want to make sure I did it as well. Payroll costs, either incurred during and paid at the next payroll, meaning outside of the time period, those are covered, or those that were incurred prior but paid during. All of that's included, so they've gone on both sides, include as much as you possibly can. Calculation of payroll costs split over pay periods was explained. It took them about 10 pages to explain it. Basically, if you pay one time a month, you're going to have to divide and pay part of it. If you pay weekly, bi-weekly, or semi-monthly, you should not have to divide out and do a split pay period. because you can go to the next one and cover it under frequently asked 1 and 2. Cash compensation. I've had some of you ask about tips and so on. Cash compensation is the gross amount before any taxes, employee benefit payments, or similar payments. It also includes all forms of pay, tips, commissions, bonuses, hazard pay, anything else. So if you're figuring out the amount for the PPP, make sure you include all amounts. And if you don't, if people deal with cash tips, looking at waitresses and waiters, things like that, you're supposed to guesstimate to the best of your ability. If you believe there's additional cash beyond what's in the tax records, you're supposed to guesstimate the best you can. Keep in mind, if you guesstimate too much for that employee, then they might get questioned on their tax returns why they didn't report cash. Double-edged sword. Group health care benefits paid or incurred are included, but only those paid by the employer. For example, if you have an employee portion of a health care, the employee portion cannot be included. Employer paid retirement benefits are included. However, I put in bold there a couple of things so that you can keep track of it. It is not covered for those that are accelerated from periods outside of the covered period. That's new. I don't know what this does to a SEP plan because you're not really accelerating, you're paying it during the time period. But I have several people who used the recommendation or the frequently asked questions in the past to pay out SEP. And now the question is that an accelerated or is that a full payment from a prior year? I could argue it either way. I believe it's a full payment from a prior year. Accelerated means you're trying to prepay it. This is not a prepaid, it's a due from tax year 2019. You happen to incur it or to pay it during the time of the PPP. But just keep that in mind. It's going to be a lender-based decision. So it talks about that acceleration. The last one is, and this was referenced like 6 different times in different places on their FAQs, owner's compensation depends on the business type. They literally spent 20 pages describing an LLC, partnership, a whole bunch of different things, so be careful with it. It's capped at either $20,833 or $15,385. It depended on which type of calculation you were doing. Whether you were in your 8-week window or a 24-week window, it had all different kinds of things in there. I bolded that because it was bizarre how they tried to explain it. So take a look at that. Owner compensation, still some frequently asked questions they haven't answered. What's an owner? Is a son or a daughter of an owner? An owner is a wife or a husband, a spouse who works for the company, an owner. If you're an owner but you receive a W-2, W-2, are you an owner or are you an employee? If you don't receive any bonuses, if you don't receive any 1099, but you do receive W-2, there's a lot of questions about where the owner line draws. I'm pretty sure if you're an owner, you're an owner. But if you're a spouse of an owner, but you get paid by the company, I don't think you qualify, and they haven't defined that yet. I raised that back in week 4 or 5, never got any answers. All right, so a couple of other things. Non-payroll costs, frequently asked questions. Same thing, non-payroll costs, mortgage, interest, rent, lease, utilities, etc., incurred or paid during. Incurred during but paid at the next bill after. Those are all eligible. Make sure you read through because they basically expanded both sides. If you paid it during or you incurred it during, you get to include both. Alternative payroll covered period. This is for employee pay. Does not apply to anything but payroll. Kind of common sense, but they've never really said it before. Alternative payroll means payroll does not include non-payroll, so you can't use the alternative period to try to expand things that are outside of payroll. Unsecured debt is not eligible for loan forgiveness. What this was private debt that basically, let's say you have a partnership debt owed to a partnership from a partner. You can't include that because it's not secured. You do get to include, and this is the first time they've actually listed it, automotive leases, other types of leases, as long as there's a secured interest, because it literally says it has to have a secured interest in something. So if it's been incurred prior to February 15th, you still get to include that. If there's no security, you don't. Payments made on renewed leases, as long as the lease existed prior to February 15th, you can renew that, and those can still be included on any refi. Distribution of transportation, if you remember, I raised that. We had no clue what the heck that means. It basically refers to something that I don't think any of you, if you've had this, congratulations, because I read it and I was like, I don't even know what that means. It refers to transportation utility fees assessed by a state or local government only. So if you're paying some kind of transportation utility fee that's been assessed by Fayette County, Jefferson County, or your state government, or any other county where you live, make sure you deduct that, because you get that free back from the PPP, whatever $1.50 that is per month. The last frequently asked question on non-payroll is the entire electricity bill is eligible even if it's invoiced separately, because some electric bills actually split it out by what you incur versus additional costs for bringing it to your business location or other type of charges. It is intended to be the entire electric bill, gas bill, whatever service fees you have, it's the whole thing. All right, loan forgiveness, frequently asked questions. For reductions, a borrower may exclude any reduction in full-time equivalent employees if there's a good faith inability to rehire or to find a substantially equivalent employee prior to December 31st. Put the tattletale rule here. Remember, they threw this in here and it's still in there. If you tried to offer someone and they refused, you have 30 days to report them to the state unemployment office that they refused your request. If you didn't tattletale, you may not be able to use them as a full-time equivalent. Keep that in mind. Seasonal employers, you must use the same calculation period. I believe it was May 1st to November of 2019. If you want to use that same time period, you have to use that same calculation for any reduction that you have on your calculations. FTE reduction applies to all employees, including those that make more than $100,000, but you're capped at the $100,000. If wages are reduced by more than 25%, the portion in excess of that 25% reduction reduces your eligible forgiveness amount unless any safe harbor applies. Then they had 100 pages, sarcasm intended, of examples that you can go to figure out how to come up with that calculation. Basically, safe harbor, again, was if you tried to bring them back to work and they couldn't, or your business was shut down due to government and you couldn't open because you're a restaurant, you're at 25% capacity, those types of things, that's basically your safe harbor rules. For purposes of calculating the loan forgiveness, any wages or salary in excess of 25% for certain employees, you only, and I bolded this because this is new, you only take into account decreases in salaries or wages. You do not take into account any of the other discounts or reductions that you have, because there are questions about health care payments and tips and all. So this is only wages and salary for your full-time equivalency reduction. Take a look at it if you need that, because it was very convoluted with how they tried to do it. These are the updates we already covered. That's it. So the PPP, it was a large one. Oh, I do want to go through a couple of things while I'm doing this. So the question I got asked about the small businesses, fewer than 50 employees, I just grabbed this. I had it in a bunch of different areas, but this one was highlighted. So I was like, okay, two aspects. One is paid sick leave due to school closure, and the other is emergency paid leave under the FMLA. When doing so would jeopardize the viability of the business. You still have to justify it, but there's your answer on smaller than 50. The answer, a couple of things. One, I had this on the screen just so you all could see it. So your thing about the public health advisory. When you have an order from the governor on July 20th that says, here are the Johns Hopkins University Resource Center with the 15%, and the fact that they're now doing a recommendation that you not return to work, that becomes the recommendation under the FFCRA. This one is on here because I want to point out something that frustrates me. So this is the frequently asked questions. Actually, I'm going to switch. I'm going to do this one last. Let me see something here. So it was this one. This was our governor's order. This is the May 1st or May 8th order that went into effect on the 11th with regard to how we're going to open our businesses. It's the last order we have from the governor about opening our businesses. It creates some real issues. This is the FAQ about reopening our economy. Talking about the order, this is the date of the order right here, May 11th. We went down through all the different things. Bars, 50 people or fewer on the 29th. As you all know, on the 27th of July, he backed off on that. They have not updated the FAQs. They have not updated the minimum requirements since May 11th. They have not updated a single question or answer on the FAQs on this page since June 29th. It doesn't even include that we're back to 10 or fewer. Doesn't include that we're back to 25% in restaurants. This is a type of thing where you all need guidance and we need to know where we stand, and there's nothing there. And that's a concern. The other thing I wanted to cover, if you go to this page, which is the COVID-19 page for Kentucky, has all the information on it, has the hot spots, all the testing, all the updates. The problem here is, and it also has the frequently asked questions, the tattletale page about how to report it. It's the KY Safer, the price gouging reporting, the contact tracing. Since Chase covered this, I did want to cover all of your information for what you're supposed to do, myth and fact, education talking points. These are all updated with FAQs. You may want to go there and take a look because they have been updated to contact tracing and what they're going to do. It has a lot of important things on here. My concern is I haven't seen this page outside of the contact tracing be updated in the last month. So if any of you have a ability to address this with anyone at the higher ups, that's something that we truly need them to do, which is give us some more updates on where we stand. The EEOC guidance is on this page, the one that I told you about, the issue dates on the 3rd with resuming the closing, the right to sue notifications, and the update, whoops, I don't know why that popped on the screen, but the update from the New York State, I just grabbed one of them, there's like 150 talking about it, but the order is right here. And if you want to see it, I can send that out to anybody, but it was against the Department of Labor and declared a lot of it to be invalid. So those are your updates. I haven't been able to read the frequently asked questions, or I'm sorry, the chat sessions, so have at it.
All right.
Allison or Autumn?
Yeah,
Pull
so
anything
I
else
think
off?
that a lot of these came in early, and I think that you've addressed some of them. But I'll go ahead and ask just so these people have explicit answers if you'd like. So some providers are giving employees a note to be off 14 days even though they've tested negative and not exhibiting COVID symptoms.
Right, and that's what we talked about a little bit. The problem you run into with something like that is as soon as you have a doctor's note, then you fall under this, and I'm going to go back to it. I can't emphasize it enough. You fall under, you're subject to a quarantine or isolation order. So if a doctor presents a note and you get it, I know how frustrating that has to be as an HR professional because here they test negative and you still get it. You need to try to follow up with that doctor, but keep in mind at least one district court in New York has said you can't even follow up with that doctor. So it's going to create some rubs. Use common sense. I'm going to throw my hat away as an attorney, and I'm going to tell you all the comment I give to companies I deal with. There's the legal, there's the practical, and sometimes the legal gets to the point of absurd. So you don't want to be frozen by inertia, meaning you don't want to be to the point where you can't do anything because the law says you can't do it. Use your common sense. If you get sued, then you can address it with that employee and point out that, look, they were negative tested. We did everything that was asked. We were trying to, allow them remote. We tried to allow them a separate room. We tried to allow them all different accommodations, but at some point we can't pay people to stay at home. I'm not telling you get sued, but at some point it's absurd. One other thing I did want to point out is because, and I closed it down, but the governor's directives on that May 11th literally said you must allow employees to telework if they can, and that has never been changed. So we are still stuck with telework if at all possible. I think that's unfair to employers because some people, as we talked about last week, they cannot telework. They're not capable of doing it without supervision. And yet the rules right now from the state of Kentucky are if an employee has the ability to telework, and I don't mean the capability, if they can telework, employers must allow them to do it. He has not backed off of that. We have one guidance on May the 8th, and we've never gotten an update to that guidance. I think by August 8th, 3 months in, you should have new guidance on that, but we don't. If I sound frustrated, I am. It's not a political frustration. You come out with all of these orders up front. You now void the one that gave work share, which you promised everybody, including the governor on this call, said work share was going to be there. His people in charge of the work share division got on here and said, I was wrong, that everything was set up right, that their website worked great, no problems with it. You come out with all of these executive orders, you've got to update us. You cannot just sit in time frozen in April and say, everybody comply with everything from here on out. We're subject to it by Supreme Court order. We can't ignore it, but it's not being cleaned up. And so it's a problem, and this is one of them.
Right.
What else you have?
So we've got, if an employer has more than 500 employees throughout the state, they are not required to, basically the rules to FFCRA don't apply, correct?
Yeah, it's above 500 unless it's industry specific. Then you don't fall under certain of these protections and certain of these directives, but you have your own. And one of those, and this could be well beyond what's being asked, but remember, if you accepted any money from the federal government and you're a mid-sized company, then you have waived any right to stop a union investigation, a union vote. You can't require any union secrecy, and you basically have authorized union to take over, and you won't object to a collective bargaining agreement. If that's freaking you out right now, you need to go back. There was a hidden part of the CARES Act that no one really talked about, but it was basically saying companies that accepted any money that were larger than 500, basically you would become unionized or open yourself up to a union without any ability to challenge it at all. So that's the only thing, CARES Act. So just be careful out there.
All right. So if someone qualifies for FFCRA from experiencing symptoms, can it automatically be designated as FMLA?
Yeah, basically, if it falls under, where am I? Let me get my screen's not showing up with a slide. So if it falls under one of these 6, it's automatic. So if the person is experiencing symptoms and is seeking a medical diagnosis, the answer becomes number 1. If they are then subject to self-quarantine, the answer becomes, but yet have not yet been diagnosed, they fall under number 6. So that particular hypothetical could fall under any one of those at different times.
Yeah, so I think the question is then, can they designate it as FMLA? So whether or not they qualify for FFCRA, can they designate FMLA at the same time?
Well, but see, so to answer that question, the FFCRA is FMLA. It basically just comes up with more ways for you to qualify under the FMLA. So the FFCRA literally just expanded the scope of 2 things. One is sick pay leave or sick leave. The other is the FMLA becoming FMLEA or EFMLEA, depending on which version you look at. But the FFCRA literally just says you are entitled to 12 weeks of leave. 2 weeks are sick. The additional 10 are FFCRA, FMLEA leave. So if you look at this, 10 weeks of paid expanded I should have capitalized this, FMLA leave at 2/3 of the regular rate where the employee is unable to work due to the need for care for a child, or they get the full amount if they are on leave. So these things are FMLA leave. The FFCRA just expanded the leave that you're entitled to use to incorporate the COVID-19, these 6 items.
Perfect. Okay, and what if a contact tracer informs you you've been exposed and should quarantine at home for 14 days? I'm assuming the question there is, does that count as a being advised to self-quarantine or a health provider telling you to quarantine?
Absolutely. So the whole purpose of this originally was not the way it came out, and we talked about that last week because I gave Congress a pass, everybody should. First time this was all adopted, everybody thought that these 6 things listed here were going to be so small. We're literally dealing with families that they have a COVID-19 at home, so they have to stay home. We're dealing with a really small portion of the population. That's what this was designed for. And it turned into this explosion because of the massive quarantine orders from governors and president and everyone else to shut down the country. So the question actually gets, which is, that person will go through a contact tracing as part of a CDC contact or a state health department. They would be subject to a 14-day quarantine order or advised to self-quarantine as part of a contact tracing. So yes, they clearly would fall under the FFCRA intended original focus. Now we've of course got a lot more because it got exploded beyond any kind of belief that it was intended to be there. So I've got one that you sent to me. The answer is, I'll do this the right way. I won't give the answer and then the question. So if a child care worker tests positive and the child is then sent home, that is a closure of the school, even if the school's not closed. If that child does not have the ability to have that child cared for at the school because it's a partial closure, or that child can't go due to a positive COVID in her school, his or her school, they do qualify under the number right here where it's closed, because it doesn't matter that the rest of the school is open, that child's class, and they're being ordered to quarantine as part of a contact tracing or a school partial closure. I've had that particular question actually asked. The only problem with the one I've had was it was a first responder child care, which that means that first responder is in a world of trouble because they have to continue working. They can't care for their child, and they're not entitled to any leave under the FFCRA. So that's where it really sucks. But that child care is all first responder, and they just shut it all down. And now the first responders are scrambling. That's sad. So, sorry. Next.
I think that's it. The last two you have, I think, already addressed. Can we require medical documentation to pay employees for emergency sick days? It sounds like the answer is yes and no. Then it's changing.
Yeah. And I'm sorry that we didn't have final answers on the phase 5 that I thought would be adopted this week. Luckily, you do have some answers on executive action. Regardless of how you all think about where we are politically, the executive action is designed to try to provide some relief. So I think it's at least a step in the right direction. Hopefully by next week, we'll know who's filed suit on that, which things you do and don't have to do, how you're supposed to implement that. I don't have any answers for you because it's literally less than 48 hours old. It was announced Saturday afternoon at around 4:30 or 5. Nothing happened on Sunday to expand on it. I do expect some substantial updates, and I think Congress will be called back. I just don't think it'll happen this week because everybody wants to exert their own forms of pressure on each other. So I don't know that I'll have congressional updates by Monday, but we will have a lot of school opening, reshutting, governor new announcement on the mask mandate that he issued last week, as well as the restaurant and bar opening, reclosing, reopening, and whether we get to go beyond 10 people or not. So there's a lot more out there. Just stay tuned.
Thank you, Jim and Allison. Boy, a lot of changes, a lot of craziness. Thank you all for hanging with us through this, all this information. We'd love to hear from you during the week between now and next week. If there's something that's really bothering you or something that's a big challenge or something you'd like to share that might be really helpful for everyone else to hear, we'd be delighted to hear from you. Any final words from Chase or Autumn or Allison or Jim? Let's say goodbye. Wear a mask. Hope everyone has a great week. Keep safe. And we look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you all very much.
Thank you all.
There's my newest mask. Everybody have a great day.